Jordan's one of our new core team members at Transition Liverpool. So this workshop is using the 3 Horizons framework. We've got a big demonstration of what it looks like over there, but they're going to explain it more to you. And together we're going to collectively explore what an inclusive, just and equitable future looks like in the Liverpool City region. Coffees and teas will also be coming at 11:30.
Hi everyone. I haven't actually ever done any workshops like this before, so you'll see how it goes. So I'm Jordan. I am a current 5th year Masters student at the Centre for Alternative Technology in Equitable in Wales. I'm not really trained or anything in workshop giving, but one of our teaching weeks was about social sustainability, and we did a lot of exercises where we could use in community engagement, and I just really thought that this was quite fitting. So it's actually got nothing to do with retrofit in ways, but we can include retrofit within the scope of what we're visioning. So the actual exercise is kind of like, it's a visioning exercise to answer a particular question. So you could phrase the question in any sort of way that suits your agenda. So today's question that we're going to be using is, what does a sustainable, inclusive, just and equitable future look like for the Liverpool City region? And we can apply anything that we want to that and talk about how that fits in within the graph that we've got drawn there. So in doing this, we're going to be imaging a future that partly exists, but then is exacerbated by how we pursue those goals. So, for example, the way we organise with Transition Liverpool, actually trying to promote other sustainable outlets. And then just kind of adding to like the collective action aspect of Transition Liverpool with this workshop. So it's a very involved group exercise where we have conversations about what we all want to see, but how it could benefit and maybe disadvantage each other. And so like the main 2 goals of the whole exercise is to generate creative conversations, and from those creative conversations tell stories that we can then share and enable the change to happen systemically. But I'm just going to let this video kind of do the main explaining, and then I'll give my explanation.
Don't use bullet points.
I have to watch the ad, sorry.
In a presentation. Look, if you're responsible for driving news. Imagine the following conversation, the kind of thing you might hear in a meeting. Perhaps you'll recognise it. Depressing statistics are
Right, so the way we plot out the workshop is there's basically 3 steps, so we're going to separate it up into 3 chunks of time where we're going to talk about the 3 individual curves on the graph. So the first one that we're going to be talking about is H1 or Horizon 1, where we're talking about a scenario in the current system where business as usual is losing its fit for purpose. So the plotted at the top of the curve is kind of like how we're going about things now, but not in an ideal way. So for example, how we're very reliant on like corporate giants for delivery services such as like Amazon, or say, because we're trying to keep this within the Liverpool City region, the constant expansion of Liverpool Airport and how that has negative effects. And then so, because it trends downwards, it like lines up. No. Yeah. Yeah, and as it trends downwards, and it doesn't actually hit the bottom, because a lot of the infrastructure and things that exist currently can be transferred into the new system change. So for example, at the bottom I've put here, existing cycle and walking infrastructure to be retained. So that is infrastructure that has come about in probably very carbon intensive ways, but it's a necessity to keep that for the future system that we want. And so that is kind of like, what are the signs of that the pattern or system we have today are no longer fit for the future, and what values and practices are helping to prop up that system. But we'll come back to that because we will do it in a minute. And then H3, there is a reason that you go H1 to H3 and then H2. I think that will become evident. It doesn't make sense at first. So that's kind of the emerging future possibilities that could happen. So H3 slopes upwards, gradually increasing with time, and at the bottom of the curve present are seeds of a viable future. So for that one I've put a few people with natural building material knowledge, which is the way forward in the architecture industry, in my opinion. I don't know what the other architects in the room are thinking, but that's kind of my whole gig as a master's student. And then as the curve goes upwards, I've put in the middle like kind of growth in retrofitting knowledge through education. So at the minute, I wouldn't say retrofit is kind of the pinnacle, at the pinnacle in architectural education. I feel like my uni pushed for it, and a lot of other unis are starting to push for it more, but I wouldn't say it's taught, and it's not taught well if it is taught. So that's kind of like how you would say that was going upwards in viability for the future. And then at the top, I've put food security for all and better maintenance of green spaces and parks. So this is kind of like the ideal outcome in most scenarios, and I'd say there's a lot more scope for adding to that in this session. Yeah, so that is kind of like what visions of the future are there, what values are we going to stand for, how can we collaborate with others to make our vision a reality. And so it's kind of like encouraging regenerative and distributive economies. And then H2, which is sort of a lot more complicated, it's relatively, is kind of pinning down disruption events, which could go one or two ways. So at the top of it's a curve that slopes upwards and then goes down. And at the top of the curve, we talk about massive pieces of disruption which are happening in regards to the question. So I've plotted an overhaul of travel infrastructure, because that could be deemed as a good thing, but also could be deemed as a bad thing. And then, for example, another one, the proposal of the tidal energy barrage, which I feel like, as of yet, hasn't had a lot of criticism. And it is a good thing in some respects, but there's a lot of like ecology disadvantages and a lot of things that I don't think have been talked about, but we can talk about that. So at the bottom of each of the slopes in the curve, you have H2 minus on the left, which are kind of scenarios where the disruptions happened and they are the physical manifestations of the negatives, really. So I've plotted innovations making farming more efficient but more environmentally damaging. Insulating homes with plastic insulation, which again is debatable, but contributing to the fossil fuel industry through a means that is zero carbon, it just doesn't sit right with me. And then planting non-native trees and landscape proposals. So if we're not planting native biodiversity, or native being a relative term, is that really right? And is that sustainable? And then on the other side, are the positives, so it's H2 plus. And then for this I've put examples such as sustainable agriculture, which promotes biodiversity and soil health, planting native mixes of trees, and then retrofit with bio-based local materials, or local materials. Just to kind of say that these disruptive acts can be positive, and not always completely negative. And so in this section, it's kind of what innovations are already disrupting things and how can we help them grow, and which innovations do we need to make sure aren't just captured, which is the H2 minus, which is kind of how they separate it. So H2 minus is capturing the disruption, and then the growth points of the future system that we want are the H2 plus, which is harnessing this disruption. So coming back to the question that we're about to workshop, what does a sustainable, inclusive, just and equitable future look like for the Liverpool City region? So we're just going to split up the day up into three, so starting with H1, then we're going to move to H3, take a break, have a few talks between that, and then later on in the day we're going to come back and do another session where we finish off talking about H3 and then end on H2. So, I think just go to the next one. So this is what we're going to do now. We're going to go into groups of our tables and then talk about what signs or patterns of the system we have today are no longer fit for the future. And so plot out what we have in mind for the H1 curve, and then we'll come back in about 10 minutes. And just at the end of that, everyone can come and plot on the graph whereabout they think it would be, and I'll help, and I'll be walking around to say whether that's actually a H1. So, yeah. Cool.
I also think it's one of the...
So you guys, you're the ones workshopping. Yeah. So, well, we've got all of those. So capitalism is kind of surrounding all of those.
But this is maybe just first principles, this is maybe a section, but also just the way they are. So if we've got the demand for student accommodation, is that going to
Maybe they are converted.
also, if I didn't say this, but if there's any infrastructure that you're wanting to keep that is a product of the same ways that we've been thinking about these things, then pop them down.
What's interesting is when you start feeling things.
Yeah, is a big one from the combined authority, because they talk about doing all sorts and then go and demolish buildings that are perfectly suitable for retrofit, that have heritage value, and beans from Kenya. Ah, right, okay. Okay, yeah, definitely a big one. Health inequalities and reducing life expectancy, healthcare privatisation, yeah, definitely. But yeah, that's awful cost/benefit analysis could be different. Yeah, that's the majority of them. Did anybody have anything that we would want to conserve that is part of the business as usual but useful?
You want the connections to exist.
Yeah.
You might not want the supply chains bringing the things, but you might want the links with Kenya to remain in some way or other.
Yeah. I think another one for that would be skills that people already have. Like, how does that transfer into the new future system? So, obviously, the skills that exist that are going to be beneficial for that, but how can they add to them skills to, for example, within architecture, people that don't know how to retrofit, how can they learn to retrofit, but then also apply the knowledge that they've learned in the building industry to that. So yeah, we'll move on to H2. H3, sorry. So in this, we're going to kind of be talking about what infrastructure already exists that is working towards actively a systemic change or sustainable values or social justice movements, and then how in the future is that going to grow and increase, and how do we want to vision that happening? So yeah, I'll leave you to it. Thank you.
The docks, there was like the water tower in the outlet dock, lifted up water with a steam engine, and then that water power drove the rock gates and the cranes and all of that, because they didn't have electricity back in the 1840s. Not to have police perhaps, or less of it. The money spent on it,
Right, I'm gonna move on to the H2 solutions if anyone would like to. So the curve in this graph goes up and then down. I'm just reiterating for people that weren't in the room. So the top of the curve is big disruptions that could occur, that could spark a move in either the right or wrong direction. The wrong direction being the H2 minus side, which is at present. So as I said before, with insulating homes with plastic insulations, and then innovations making farming more efficient but more environmentally damaging. And then on the positive side, the H2 plus, options such as retrofit with bio-based and local materials, and then sustainable agriculture, which promotes biodiversity and soil health. So yeah, just trying to apply that to the Liverpool city region and what sort of disruption could we see or are we seeing that could be positive or negative. Yeah, try to write them on the blue ones if you want. Thanks.
I think it's kind of displayed on there. So disruptive innovation. What innovations are already disrupting things and how can we help it grow? Good. At the beginning of the end.
Just kind of explain what we're going to do with the information there. So right, on the top of the curve, you've all added things like blue hydrogen, and CCS, and then something about investment in green hydrogen. Carbon capture, distraction from facing the prospect and reducing carbon we emit. Blending of hydrogen into grid rather than electrifying homes, delaying issues. No more roadmaps, just pathways, cycle paths. I'm not sure that's...
Trains and trams.
Yeah. Economic models, e.g. Eleanor Ostrom. Donut economics, share use. A new ferry terminal. Get more people involved with Citizens UK. Liverpool has its launch at St George's Hall, 18th of November. Demonstrator projects, e.g. biochar and brutal, green open homes, etc. And then the more H2 minus options are things like online delivery, so like having very negative connotations around carbon emissions due to travelling and then cryptocurrency, internet. The national grid is not fit for future purposes. Need more pipelines as and pylons, and then the expansion of Liverpool Airport. And then the more positive Horizon 2s are creating new infrastructure for ground source heating, legal status for natural environments, e.g. rivers, more and more meaningful engagement on big projects in the Liverpool city region, local community divers. Drivers. The Post, online local press. Locally grown bamboo as a material and construction resource. Encourage planting trees. Special brand / type of trees absorb double the amount of CO2 from the atmosphere. Yeah, that's basically all of them. So
Jordan, why does the blue go down and then what does the blue going down mean? That you're not that it's just going to go.
So these are things that are disruptive, but not in the quantity of disruption that is harmful. So like the more that we're having happen is harmful to like the moving forward of things, if that makes sense. So like it's just getting lost into a vacuum if there's so much happening Whereas if there's disruption to a minimum, it's kind of sustainable as like a practice rather than within sustainability values. Yeah, so
I'm afraid I don't get that. I don't know if anyone else does, but I don't get that going up and going down bit.
Is it a means to an end?
Innovation
I can
that
see maybe
fizzles
it's a-
off and then stuff that goes on.
Is it a short-term requirement over a transition? I could understand that.
Yeah.
That's not what I heard from you, but I don't know.
it's because the way the graph is plotted, it's pattern or prevalence. So as you go up, the more of it is happening, and when more disruption happens, it kind of levels out after an amount of time. And so the ones down here are things that are happening in the future, but less so because all of that disruption has already happened.
So it's like floppy disks. New, disruptive, but they didn't last very long.
Yeah. And once we get to a certain point, those types of disruptions should kind of plateau, because we're not having to make those types of innovative change because we're at a point where we don't necessarily need that anymore.
Okay.
Is that okay?
I think so. I'm not sure I fully get it. But
I think some of the blue should be greens, that's all.
Which ones?
Yeah.
It can be a conversation. Which ones did you think?
Well, like Steve put bamboo as a thing, and that's kind of thing you want to go up.
I suppose it is. We've got to think of this as like a spectrum rather than a linear thing as well. So like, if you add a certain statement after any of these things, they could be moved around along, and
Yeah, but we
they
don't
could.
want to be dominated by bamboo in all our forest, like, but we can. Don't think we're at that point.
How I see it is, because the green is the vision, and then the red is the manager which is controlling. The blue is like a needle who can see between the green and the red. So it's suspended in the middle to keep that
Yeah. So
balance.
the things at the bottom at the end are things that either need to go down in popularity, or things that are left over from the previous way that we've been working, and then it goes up in kind of the prevalence that it should be happening in our society. So like, for example, like completely pedestrianised city centre, that's something that doesn't exist. Like that, it probably exists around here now.
Oh, it's quite a lot more than it was though.
A lot more than it was, yeah, but they're just the seeds of the future that we want. Whereas like every single city centre, bar maybe a few, should be completely pedestrianised. Is that? Okay, so the kind of purpose of this exercise was to kind of get you talking about what potentials in the future you want to see, but also as like an outcome from this, we're going to put together a kind of visual for what the Liverpool City region could look like, using all of your thoughts, and there's going to be like an output in the next year, like a visual output. So yeah, that's kind of a fun way to envision what would happen.